like to read about characters doing things that further the plot, not doing each other. What's up book nerds, I'm Lucky's Universe and welcome back to my channel, and today we are going to be continuing our Court of Thorns and Roses series review with A Court of Mist and Fury. And again, I've made very comprehensive notes. So if you haven't watched my previous video on A Court of Thorns and Roses, I highly recommend you do so because I will probably discuss between the two of them and it'll give you a bit of context for this video. As always, let's start with a disclaimer. I am a full believer in everyone being able to share their opinions about books on the internet, whether it be positive or negative, but just because I say something is trash doesn't mean it is trash or that the people who find it interesting are trash. That being said, I do have a writing degree, so I'm a tiny bit qualified to judge. Maybe, possibly. I guess we're gonna find out. We're gonna be going through a lot today, so grab your tea and let's get started. First of all, let's start with the plot. So A Court of Mist and Fury picks up about 3 months after the end of A Court of Thorns and Roses. Feyre and Tamlin are engaged, but they're experiencing a little bit of premarital discord. Feyre is unhappy, she feels as though Tamlin is controlling her and doesn't know what to do about her situation. There's also this priestess named Dianthe who's planning their wedding, and she kind of matters to the story, but not really. On her wedding day, Feyre is just super sad and starts screaming out for help in her head, and who is going to show up but Rhysand from the Night Court, who comes to collect on their deal. Just in case you don't remember, when Feyre was under the mountain with Amarantha, Rhysand made a deal with her saying that he would heal her and help her if she agreed to spend 1 week a month with him in the Night Court for the rest of her life. So Rhys takes Feyre to the Night Court and he teaches her how to read and a bunch of other stuff that no one really cares about. She meets the members of Rhys's inner circle, which is his cousin Morrigan, Azrael, and Cassian. None of whom I grew particularly attached to, and also kind of still wondered what their purpose was in the story and why they were there at all. Feyre learns of this guy called the King of Hybern who wants to take down the wall that separates Prythian from the Mortal Lands and take over the Mortal Lands, and possibly destroy Prythian in the process. Rhys asks Feyre to spy on Tamlin and Lucien, who I totally forgot even existed, and figure out whether Tamlin would fight with Rhys to protect the Mortal Lands against Hybern. Feyre goes back to the Spring Court, and from then it's very obvious that Tamlin and Lucien are now the bad guys, although how that happened, I will never know. And the whole book is pretty much Feyre just going back and forth between the Spring Court with Tamlin and the Night Court with Rhysand. Rhysand also takes her to this place called Valaris, also known as the Starlight City, which is a city untouched by Amarantha because she didn't know about it. There's another character that Feyre meets called Amren. Again, still don't know why she matters. And together they form some sort of basic-ass found family that we're supposed to care about. They find out that the King of Hybern is planning to use this thing called the Cauldron to destroy everything, and a lot of the plot is them trying to figure out how to stop him. Along the way, Feyre also finds out that Rhysand is her mate, and that makes her angry for some reason because Rhys is absolutely perfect in this book, so of course she's mad that he's her mate.
That's not good enough!
Hybern tries to attack Valaris, but Rhysand, Feyre, and the rest of the cast of friends fight him off. A bunch of other irrelevant stuff happens, and Feyre and her new friends try to destroy the cauldron, but they are captured by Hybern, and they find out that Tamlin was working with Hybern in exchange for getting Feyre back, because he thinks that Feyre is sort of brainwashed by Rhysand. That's good tea. Feyre's sisters, who I also forgot existed, enter the picture and they get forced into the cauldron and become fairies. And I guess I'm supposed to care about that. In order to save everyone, Feyre decides to go back to Tamlin under the pretense that she's sort of like broken out of a spell that Rhys put her under and now wants to go back with Tamlin. But what Tamlin doesn't know is that Feyre is just playing double agent for the Night Court. That's the end of the story. Ta-da! Honestly, with A Court of Mist and Fury, I was a little furious at the lack of plot. This book is 800 pages. 800 pages too long. People who have read the book and are watching me recap the events may think, wow, you left a lot of stuff out. And yeah, I did, because I only included what was absolutely relevant. The rest is just meaningless fluff that really doesn't really have anything to do with the main plot. And also I hated basically every second of it, so I didn't feel the need to also put you through that. But enough about plot, let's move on to the characters. Feyre is the epitome of a special little snowflake. What I didn't mention that happened in A Court of Thorns and Roses is that at the end, Feyre became a fairy. So now she's like a badass. And if you thought she was insufferable as a human, wait until you meet Fairy Feyre. I sort of understand the direction in which the author was trying to take Feyre's character arc. She was supposed to go from this sort of traumatized, weak human girl, and then she becomes a fairy. She realizes that she has choices, and then she becomes a badass. But does she? I found that a lot of the story, Feyre was just wallowing in her own problems, thinking about stuff but not doing anything, and just waiting for guys to save her. She just waits to be rescued all the time. You know, when she's thinking about, oh my gosh, I can't go through with this wedding with Tamlin, she's literally walking down the aisle towards him, and all she's doing in her head is screaming, help, 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 and then who's gonna show up but Rhysand to come and save her? The way I often describe Feyre is if Bella Swan tried to be Katniss Everdeen and failed. Also, where did her bow and arrow talent go? Wasn't she like a hunter in the first book and now no? Honestly, I just feel that Feyre shows absolutely no development from the first book. She has the same personality as she did in A Court of Thorns and Roses. I feel that she lacks proactivity. She waits for other people to solve her problems rather than trying to solve her problems herself. I'm also a little bit annoyed at the way that she treats Tamlin. I get that Tamlin has now turned into this mentally and physically abusive person, but Feyre is like constantly blaming him for the same things that she does. She says he doesn't communicate, he doesn't check up on her, but she doesn't communicate with him. She doesn't tell him any of her secrets. She doesn't really check up on him. So there's a bit of a double standard going on. The author also tries to play up that Tamlin's physically abusive, but so is Feyre. Remember, she did lash out and accidentally hurt Lucien, just like Tamlin lashed out and accidentally hurt her. Just because it's a girl attacking a boy doesn't make it any less abusive. So if we're gonna hate Tamlin for hurting Feyre, why are we not hating Feyre for hurting Lucien? Even though I just forgot that Lucien existed and I don't really care about him, the point still stands. Next, let's talk about Tamlin. Boy, did Tamlin go through a character makeover. Despite the fact that his personality almost completely changed, he was useless in the first book and he's useless in the second book. Something that I thought was interesting to note is both Tamlin and Feyre are suffering from some form of PTSD. Yet we praise Feyre for how she deals with her PTSD and punish Tamlin for how he deals with it. Again, it goes back to the double standard of Tamlin being physically abusive and Feyre being physically abusive. Why are we hating one but not the other? It just doesn't make sense to me. All in all, I really don't have that much to say about Tamlin because he's barely in the book. He kind of just appears at the start and appears at the end, and we're just supposed to accept that. Moving on, let's talk about Rhysand, or as I like to call him, Tamlin 2.0. Somewhere between the end of A Court of Thorns and Roses and the beginning of A Court of Mist and Fury, Tamlin and Rhysand underwent some sort of Freaky Friday situation and just swapped personalities. Something that I realized while reviewing this book is that the plot of A Court of Mist and Fury is Feyre is sad. Fairy appears, steals Feyre away, she goes to live in his palace and falls in love with the fairy that she's staying with. Isn't that A Court of Thorns and Roses? Throughout reading this book, I could not help but draw parallels between Tamlin in A Court of Thorns and Roses and Rhysand in A Court of Mist and Fury. They're the same character. I felt that Feyre and Rhys's relationship didn't really improve throughout this book. You know, Feyre at first, like, she doesn't immediately fall in love with Rhysand, arguably, but she is forced to spend time with Rhys until she falls in love with him. I'm of the opinion that Feyre is just suffering from a really weird case of Stockholm Syndrome. Think about it. In the first book, she's taken away from her home, she lives with this fairy Tamlin, and eventually falls in love with him. In A Court of Mist and Fury, Rhys takes her away from her new family, takes her to live in his palace, and then she falls in love with him. I'm sensing a pattern here. And if her only experience in a previous relationship is Tamlin, who is now emotionally and physically abusive, and Rhys is her only other male love interest option, of course she's gonna fall in love with him, because compared to Tamlin, he seems so much better. Even though he's not as physically abusive, he's certainly equally emotionally abusive. Another disturbing similarity between Tamlin and Rhys is the aspect of masks. In the first book, Tamlin and his people were cursed to wear masks by Amarantha. In A Court of Mist and Fury, it's constantly referenced that all of Rhysand's problematic behavior is just a mask that he puts on. People have this ongoing argument about whether we can justify Rhys being good in A Court of Mist and Fury when he was so terrible in A Court of Thorns and Roses. And people often make the argument that Rhys was putting on a mask, because he explains it in the book. It's just a mask that he shows to the rest of the world so that no one can sense who he truly is and find out about the people that he cares about and use that against him. Tamlin's people were cursed to wear masks, including Tamlin himself. Rhysand wears a metaphorical mask. Does Feyre have a type? Honestly, this whole Tamlin, Feyre, Rhysand relationship just seems really messed up. This whole book to me just feels like Feyre is suffering mentally and cannot make decisions or feel powerful without a man by her side telling her what to do. And A Court of Mist and Fury is just Feyre scrambling to fill a hole that Tamlin left. Rhysand also just annoys me for the fact that he's so clearly perfect. You know, he emphasizes over and over and over again that it is Feyre's choice what she wants to do, and he would never tell her what to do, although he does really dictate what she does and doesn't do in A Court of Mist and Fury. He cares for the poor. He's basically Feyre in the first book. And this whole book just feels like the author is saying, look how terrible Tamlin is, now look at how great Rhys is.
That's not good enough!
I can't, oh my gosh. I need something stronger than tea. Side note, why does Rhysand refer to his friendship group as the inner circle? He has no friends outside of that circle, so how can there be an inner circle if there's no outer circle? Why aren't they just called the circle? In summary, I was kind of just fed up with all of the characters in this book. I didn't like any of them. I didn't think any of their character development was good. Lucian is still irrelevant. Don't come at me, but Cassian and Moore serve no purpose in the plot. Neither does Nesta, but I feel like that's a topic reserved for the third book. Okay, time for writing. Just like the first book, A Court of Mist and Fury suffers a lot from overwriting. In chapter 1, there's like a whole chunk dedicated to explaining that Feyre is vomiting. We don't need that. One half thought out sentence can explain that. Again, Feyre thinks a lot, but just doesn't do anything. There are just so many words that don't need to be there. This whole book feels like it's trying too hard to be good. It just feels unedited. The repetition in this book is legendary.
You should experience it. You always say I want to experience things, but I don't think you actually want to experience things because you would experience it if you wanted to experience things.
I went through and counted every single time Feyre breathed a sentence. 39 times. Feyre breathed a sentence 39 times. Rhys also purred 13 times, and don't even get me started on how many times Tamlin growled. Surely a professional editor, maybe not a copy editor, but at least a proofreader would have picked that up. And I know you all want to hear about it. Let's talk about the sex scenes. Chapter 55, the infamous chapter 55. I honestly don't know what to say about that. I like to read about characters doing things that further the plot, not doing each other. Not to mention the practical implications of the paint, and if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. This isn't body safe edible paint. This is straight up craft paint that Feyre is using. And that's going in places that paint shouldn't go into. Surely that's gotta have some kind of health drawback. Like in the first book, I didn't feel like the sex needed to be there. I didn't even think that it was particularly well written, and I just felt uncomfortable reading it. In summary, A Court of Mist and Fury certainly made me furious. Although I respect people who love this book, in my opinion, the characters were bad, the writing was bad, and this book was one of the hardest books to get through that I've ever read. That concludes my review and analysis on Sarah J. Maas's A Court of Mist and Fury. If you agree with my opinion, leave a comment. If you disagree with my opinion, leave a comment. Remember, we are spreading debate, not hate. Remember to subscribe to my channel and like this video. If you haven't already followed my TikTok, go check it out. I post some pretty cool stuff on there. Also, I'll leave a link to my Goodreads account below. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you later.